What up, YouTube? It's July 31st, 2017, and right now it's 9:37 p.m. It's going to be about the chapter that I finally finished reading. And, well, I had already finished reading, but I finally got done breaking it down. Then I had a couple of things I had to look up and make sure and check into, in which I did today. And I documented all of it on my Facebook like I normally do. This time I split it up into like a part 1 and a part 2 in my notes section. And of course I made it private. It was a little weird though, because today, I felt somewhat discombobulated in the mind. I didn't really get that much sleep last night because I had a terrible toothache and a headache at the same time. And I tried to go to Walgreens, and it was like after 12 o'clock at night. Walgreens was closed. So was Kroger. So I'm like, damn, I got to endure this for the next fucking 8 hours. So I only got maybe 30 minutes here and there. Altogether, probably no more than two and a half hours of sleep. So I was kind of discombobulated today, even when putting my Facebook or writing in my notes section, documenting part 2 of this. I had a lot of extra shit going on, but I got through it all off the top like I normally do. So, I'm going to try to get through this without messing up not messing up, but without forgetting anything. Because like I say, I still got a lingering effect of that. I'm not completely discombobulated, so I'm going to go ahead and get this over with. This chapter was about the conquest of the Al-Bahrain lands. Now, I'm going to go into the geography first before I go into the story, just to lay the foundation so I don't have to explain it midway through. But, again, this is all off the top. Hopefully no cars come back here. I'm trying to have, trying to do this alone. Okay, Al-Bahrain, the lands of Al-Bahrain. Of course, I included that in my jargon to get a little bit more understanding about it. It's not necessarily just the island of Al-Bahrain. It's a part of it. Al-Bahrain is in the Persian Gulf, which is basically east of Arabia. So the land of Al-Bahrain basically is damn near all, really, of eastern Arabia, but starting from northwestern Oman, not northeastern Oman, because that's where the town of Sohar was at. The people that I went into the last chapter that I'm not going to do too much reiteration about because I already got that shit down packed, but as far as the Julanda people who the Al-Ash tribe constitutes, but, they live there in northeastern Oman, bordering the Gulf of fucking Oman, and, not really the Gulf. Well, I say the Arabian Sea, not necessarily the Gulf, but that's what that town Sohar is at. Then you got the fucking mountains stretching from northeast to northwestern Oman. It's called the Al-Hajar Mountains. But from northwestern Oman through the Arab Emirates, the Arab United Emirates, it's 7 fucking emirates today that constitute that country over there. But basically that area going north, but still on the east coast of it, all the way through Arabia, like I said, including Al-Bahrain within the Persian Gulf, but also the other land piece that's connected to the eastern portion of Arabia called Qatar. It's like a really small fucking peninsula. That's also a part of the Al-Bahrain lands, a town called Al-Hassa. The town before you get to Al-Hassa, which is called Al-Qatif, all the way up north, going past the Persian Gulf, stretching as far as southern Iraq, which is in Kuwait, and then all the way up to Al-Basra, all right? So everything a part of that whole little landmass to the east of it, well, in eastern Arabia, all the way up to southern Iraq, all of those areas are a part of the the Al-Bahrain lands. But it was also ruled by the Persians as well. It's weird because, the chief at this time, his name was Al-Mutahhir ibn Salwa al-Tamim, all right? He was basically the Persian Arab chief there. They really didn't include too much as far as Persian, but that's what they referred to him as. He was the chief of that region. And I'm assuming that was like under, well, he was kind of like though he was the chief, he was still under the fucking Persians. That's my understanding of him so far. But as the chapter starts off, they go into the message that Muhammad sent. He had sent two people. One in particular, an important guy that came up more than once, and he later on became or was promoted or appointed by Muhammad to be the chief of that area as well, Al-Bahrain. And his name is Al-Hadrami. Now, he was from Yemen as well, but he was from that little region in Yemen called Hadrami that I talked about when I went into the further conquest of Yemen and southwestern Arabia, as well as, the southeastern portion of Arabia as well, but not the fucking Al-Bahrain region, which is east of that. So that's where that guy was from. And another interesting thing about this before I go on is that I found out the year that this occurred. This actually occurred before the further conquest of Yemen. And when I thought about it, it made sense because Abu Musa ibn Ash'ari, he was one of the guys that had jurisdiction of that region in eastern Yemen, the Hadrami region. So it would make sense that this conquest of eastern Arabia / the Al-Bahrain lands occurred before that. So this is in 629. The exact month, I'm not sure, but more than likely after the whole Hudaybiyah treaty had got broken. So that was the year that this occurred. Now, I also want to mention before I go into the story, if I continue it, you had different tribes there, but two tribes for sure. One was called the Banu Bakari Ibn Wa'il tribe. Now, the chapter that I went into a long time ago when I was talking about the invasion of Mecca that happened that year, the Banu Bakari tribe that was a part of that, not necessarily a part of the invasion, but had something to do with it because they fought against the Banu Khuzai tribe. The tribe that I just mentioned, the Banu Bakari Ibn Wa'il tribe, they're like a sub-tribe of those people. You know what I'm saying? But they all ultimately belong to the Ribaya Confederation of Tribes. But they were one of the tribes that also inhabited this region of Al-Bahrain. Another tribe was, I hate when my mind gets a little somewhat discombobulated. It was the Banu Tamim tribe. That's the name of those people. And of course, you had sub-tribes of them as well, like not a sub-tribe, but more so like a clan, the Banu Tamimi clan, which Al-Mutahar ibn Sawa came from. And it's denoted by his last name, obviously. And he had two main religious groups in the region. You had Christians and you had polytheists, but you also had Magians. And I looked up the term Magian to, make sure that it doesn't slip my mind. They were basically like a Christian faction too, but they also believed in astrology as well. So it was like a little twist to it. So those are people that basically inhabited this area. And then there was another tribe called the Banu Al-Qais tribe. Now they are also like a sub-tribe of this overall Ribaya Confederation of Tribes. And they had also been in that area at least since the 3rd century. Actually, since the 3rd century, but sometime during the 4th century, groups of those people had crossed over the Persian Gulf due to the Sassanid king at the time. It was a guy named Shapur II, and he was born in 309, and I can't remember the exact year he came into power, but he reigned up until 379. Whatever that had occurred in that region, he allowed groups of those people to cross over the Persian Gulf. Because even after that time period, like I say, the Sassanids had an issue with Arabian tribes coming into their region. But this is like way before this whole rule was officiated, as far as like the Latmians being responsible for keeping traffic of Arabian tribes from entering the Persian lands. So I don't know too much of what had happened that made Shapur II make that move, but I feel like obviously he did it for some good reasons. But yeah, during the 4th century, persons from that tribe had also crossed over the Persian Gulf, even before him, they had issues with those people as well, because sometimes they would attack, assassinate people there. They were going to southern Iran and attack the people, and in response to that, Sassanids crossed over the Persian Gulf and fucking slaughtered them. That's what happened. So, again, this tribe, the Banu al-Qais tribe, is like a sub-tribe of the overall Rubaya Confederation. But they were also companions with the Banu Bukhari tribe. Keep that in mind. That's fucking interesting. Now, Muhammad had sent 2 people through an envoy, all right, to Al-Aliyah al-Hadrami, obviously giving him his terms. This is what the book goes into and what they said as far as the chapter. They gave the guy his terms or whatever, the universal stipulation, of course, certain amount of sadaqahs that you got to pay, and if you can't convert people, if you can't convert everybody in the region, of course they're going to have to be subject to paying the tax. Tax more than likely, as they delineated in this chapter, but in other chapters it's kind of like the same thing, only for a few places that it was not. Basically, they have to pay 1 dinar for every adult that decided to maintain their religious faith and did not convert to Islam. Well, of course, the sadaqahs will be redistributed amongst the poor population there, in particular the Muslims, and also the wayfarers, all right? And, it's kind of like one of the earliest, in my mind, one of the earliest signs of fucking, what they call that, socialism. You're talking about income redistribution and stuff like that. That definitely occurred there. Like I said, Muhammad didn't take the sadaqahs and use it for personal benefit. He took the dinars, but not the sadaqahs. And, of course, they have to pay a zakat as well. All right, that's the universal stipulation. So Muhammad communicated that to Al-Aliyah al-Hadrami. Then he went, I'm talking about Al-Aliyah al-Hadrami, and communicated that to the rest of the population within his region as well. So, like I say, based on what they wrote, obviously a lot of people did convert, a lot of Arabs, but you had people that did not convert, who were, again, Christians, polytheists, and Jews. Now, there was another town, the one that I mentioned earlier, called Al-Hassa. Muhammad had delivered another message to those people as well, followed by Al-Aliyah al-Hadrami. And again, some of them converted, some of them did not. Now, before I go further as far as this town and pointing out what I think is interesting, I just want to make a note of something else in the book that they pointed out. When Al-Aliyah al-Hadrami gathered up all of the texts from the people, and when he went back to Muhammad to give that to him, he accumulated at least 80,000 dinars. All right? Now I'm like, damn, that's a lot. I was like, okay, that gives like a census, at least of a percentage of the population of people there who did not convert, a great percentage. So in other words, that means you had at least 80,000 people, all right, 80,000 individuals within the Al-Bahrain region that did not convert to Islam, but it only accounts for the adults. It does not account for the children. So I'm like, damn, that's a vast-ass fucking number. I understand, like, the region is pretty vast in itself, but I'm like, damn, that's a lot of people. So I had to keep that in mind. Now, aside from that, when Muhammad suggested for the people in Al-Hassa to convert, and like I say, some did, some did not, there was another figure who I think is very fucking important. His name is Kisra. Now, when I first read this, like I say, I'm taking down names at the same time that I'm unfamiliar with, and I'm putting it in my jargon, all right? So when I read about him, you know, like basically, okay, they was talking about how Muhammad, you know, attempted to get or sent the message for people of Al-Hassa to convert. Kisra was one of the people that did not, but you know, they threw like a little innuendo up in there as far as, you know, what I read and what I took from it. It was like, okay, the people, he said Kisra, you know, lived in Al-Hassa, where he had a population hostage there. And the term, you know, I don't know if it's an Arabian word or a word from a different language. I'm going to assume the word is Arabian, but it's Wadi, all right? W-A-D-D-I. So I'm assuming that's a word that means hostage. But it was like, okay, he lived there where he had people hostage there. But they went on to say people still did not take the offer and convert to Islam, so they were subject to attack. Now, obviously, you know, the guy didn't have, like, literally hostages there. To me, I took it as kind of like an innuendo, not because I wanted to be that. It's because I was able to understand the person, the hadith in itself, because the hadith was written by a guy named Hashim ibn Amari, all right? And like I said, it was kind of like a little dirt thrown on that guy's name, basically. Like he had people under him, so he had to have been a chief of the sort. So he had people under him, and obviously the people under him, you know, people that wrote the hadith, and the guy that wrote the hadith obviously was inspired from people that orally transmitted that to him as well, that this guy, Kisra, had a hand in the people not, as far as his group, all right, because he was a polytheist, as far as his group, because he wasn't a Jew or anything like that. He had a hand or influence in those people not converting. That's why I feel like they put that little innuendo in there and referred to the people under him as being a hostage. You know what I'm saying? Now, I was like, let me check dude out a little bit more. So I'm looking up everybody's name, and then I'm, researching his name and all of this, and I'm looking, and then I came across these articles. I had to double check to make sure these articles are genuine. And one was called The Legend of Kisra in Nigeria, by the way. So this is all the way on another fucking continent, going through the Sudan, and you going down there all the way to the west coast of Africa. So I'm like, let me check this out. So I clicked on it, and I read it, and I was like, what? And I read a couple of more, I read like a Britannical, then another one, and then I read like a little bit more recent history of Nigerian history as far as like how they became to be a nation and developed like 4 major states that you got emirs and cities and all this type of stuff in up until like 1954 with 2 in particular. I'll get to that in a second. And I'm like, okay, these people, basically the Africans, the Nigerians, have an oral historical account of this same guy, Kisra, that is mentioned in this book, The Origins of an Islamic State. Now, in the book itself, when they mention Kisra, everything that I just conveyed, that's all that they said about him. So this is going to become a little bit more fascinating when I get done. So when I'm reading this, I'm like, wow. Okay, first off, he is kind of like a, he's like a progenitor of the cultures that came after him, but at least in Nigeria itself. And he's also celebrated as such. I was like, damn, I never heard this. And this is during the 7th century. So I'm reading about him. They say, okay, you got like different versions of the story, right? So what I did was I read about these different versions, and I basically, not necessarily synthesized, but picked out what's more than likely the case based on a parallel that I read in this book and what was going on in that region at the time that he come from. Now, the legend of Kisra, it basically goes like this. There's two main interpretations of it. One of them, I don't believe at all that he may have been like a Persian king. You know, even though the Persians ruled Al-Bahrain, you know, based on what they provided in this book, I'm going to oust the possibility that he was a Persian king. He was not at all. So the other main interpretation is that, and by the way, when they say Persian king, they're talking about like somebody that came from fucking or ruled in Egypt. Hell no. You know what I'm saying? I don't even think the Persians ruled in Egypt at that time. I think the Romans still had Egypt. But anyway, based on the Nigerian oral historical account of this guy, he was some type of like ruler of a sort, a chief more than likely. But he supposedly had like powers, some type of magical powers. And he was told by a seer, in other words, some type of priest. And this is why this is another reason why I believe he was more than likely a polytheist rather than a Christian. You know what I'm saying? He was told by a seer or a priest that there was a prophecy that another boy is going to be born that has his ability and his powers. And this boy might grow up to be a threat to him, right? This is according to the Nigerian oral tradition of Kisra. So Kisra felt some type of way about it. So he ordered that all of the men in his town, because also the place that he lived at, they referred to it as Bimin Kisra. I'm going to break that down in a second. So he ordered that all of the men in his town be exiled on the same exact date that was prophesied that this boy or this child would be conceived on, just to make sure that nobody is going to be born where he lives at that's going to grow up to be a threat to him within his circle, as far as the tribe of people. So that order was officiated, but he had a daughter, and her daughter had a husband, and they basically procreated a child. Now, this child turned out to be this boy that this priest had prophesied about. But the twist of the story is that the same boy grew up to be Muhammad. Now, obviously, that part I don't agree with at all. To me, that is like a folktale, and luckily I got my own little understanding of the history of Muhammad and his revolution and where he started at, Q race, his parents, people that was killed, his uncle fucking Abu Talib, all of that. So I'm able to immediately say, okay, that part is more than likely not the case. But it goes on to say that I told myself I wouldn't stick because it sounds fucking nasty when I listen to this. But they go on to say that Muhammad grew up, all right? So in other words, this will be his nephew. Muhammad grew up and, you know, obviously after his revolution started, as far as him teaching and preaching Islam, that he attempted to convert Kisra. Kisra refused. And it created a conflict to where a battle had occurred, and Muhammad's faction or his forces lost the battle the first time around, right? So they went somewhere else to rejuvenate, I guess, around the tree. Some mystical happened or whatever. Then Muhammad came back and fought against Kisra a second time, and this time they were victorious, all right? So after that occurred, that's when Kisra later on left Arabia, obviously crossed over the Red Sea, made it to East Africa, and then traveled through the Sudan. I like to say Nigritia because I like the term, and got as far as the Niger River in Nigeria. All right, so that would be basically at the western point of Nigeria. He traveled as far as Nigeria, settled in a couple of villages until he decided to create his own kingdom. And the kingdom was called, I got a burp. The kingdom was called the Borgu Kingdom. All right. Now, after he, created this kingdom of people, he later on, they referred to him as his sons, but basically the descendants that came after him, the people that came after him, created the town called Busai, which is also in Nigeria, another one called Shabi, which is also in Nigeria, and another one called Ilo, at least that's how I enunciate it, which is also in Nigeria, and then another major one called Nikki, all right, exactly like the name, Nikki. But that town of people was in Benin. Now, Benin is also definitely in fucking West Africa. It's right there. It's right next to Togo. So those four major towns sprang from the Borgu Kingdom. And then later on, they created their own factions and whatnot. But all of them traced their roots to this guy, Kisra. Before Kisra, supposedly, not too much was happening in that region to where, one could say is as noteworthy, at least in that region, as what Kisra had brought to those people there. Now, before I go into the portions of the story that I agree with, I might as well continue with this part. Now, the reason why there's a lot of truth to this, and even if I myself didn't necessarily agree that this guy lived there, the Africans in Nigeria, at least some of them, do. Now, why do I say that? Because later on, and this is probably like either the 15th or the 16th century, you had this political movement that was going on, but it was like a collection of different kingdoms under the term, I think, Wangara. I don't think it's Wangari, because this is something that I'm going to check even more deep into later on, because I feel like this is going to be fucking relevant. But that was like the political movement that was going on, and they traced their roots, all right? Now, this is documented, this part. They traced their roots back to Kisra, all right? But the thing is, when Kisra made it into that region, he didn't bring in Islam. Just like one of my earlier blogs, I'm like, shit, as far as like the Sun Guy people, why is it that by 690 they were not Islam? See, I keep a note of it as well. As far as like the people that came with Kisra, they were not Islamists either. In fact, they left Arabia to escape that. So the Nigerians who traced their history back to him made a distinction between the people of the Borgu Kingdom and then the Islamic states that came in to being later on. And based on what I read about these people, those who have like a certain amount of pride as far as the Nigerians to that history and this guy that came into the region, they're like kind of considered to be anti-Islamists. I thought that was fucking interesting. Now, going further into the history of that ties into Kisra, this happened in like 1954, all right? It was Basra and then another place, I forget the name, that starts with a K. They basically united and combined. And then the first king that ruled over both, what he's referred to as an emir, because they combined to be an emirate, kind of like the people in the United Arab Emirates today. It's 7 of them. But these two towns, or these two factions, rather, that combined together constituted an emirate which within itself. And the guy's name, the first official president of them, even though he was like the ruler, I think, of the Busai region before this, I don't think it was the one that starts with a K. And the only reason I don't remember the name is because I just wanted to keep it relevant. And like I say, just like the early Christian history, I say that the other stuff for later. But, he was already kind of like a ruler before that. But his name is Muhammadu Sanai, S-A-N-I. And this is all off the top. So from 1954 to to 1968, he ruled those two factions as one emirate. And today is 2017. When I checked the president's list or the list of the emirates there, so far they have had 5 of them. The 5th one is still in office today. But the thing is, when they united and they became an emirate, they referred to themselves as the Borgu Emirate, using the term Borgu, which also goes back to the 7th century. All right, so that's like what, 1,300 years before that, which means those people also share a sentimental value as far as this character Kisra that came into the region. Now, as far as like other versions of the story, some people don't know if it was just like an individual or a Kisra really just represents the title or a group. But I take the position that Kisra is an individual. Why? Because of what's written in this book. The hadith that I read, like I say, it's a guy named Hashim ibn Ammar. This is during the 8th century. All right, so this will be like roughly 100 years after the fact. Yeah, pretty much, yeah. So this occurred in, 629 as far as the book. So this is like 100 years after the fact during the 8th century. And they referred to him as a person, Kisra, that lived in Al-Hassa, even though they call Al-Hassa Al-Hijr. All right, so I'm going to take the position that, you got a little historical record that relates to this guy. So he was a single individual that was some type of chief of a tribe that immigrated. I thought that was fucking interesting. I was like, wow. I'm so glad I came across this fucking information. Now, I'm going into the tokens of the story that I think makes sense and what I don't think makes sense. Like I said already, the whole thing about, having magical powers, like I believe in metaphysics and stuff like that, but I don't agree with the part of the story to where they say, he was worried about some boy that was prophesied to be born that would have his power and would be a threat to him. But again, I'm not going to go into all the reasons. I don't really need to unless, I'm really put in a position to where I have no choice. But it's obvious I don't need to go into the reasons why that's not true concerning Muhammad fitting that fucking description. But I think that's pretty much just like a folktale, and it more than likely was inspired from like the tradition of Jesus, or at least the tale of him being born and being a threat, as well as certain tokens being taken or incorporated from the tale of Moses in Egypt. That's my personal opinion on that. So I don't believe like it was some little boy who was prophesied coming to being with this type of power that will become a threat to him later on. Absolutely not. Especially within the tribe of Quraysh. You had the chiefs, you had Abu Jahl, you had, I know about 7 different clans so far, but like I say, Abu Jahl was one of the main leaders or chiefs of the Quraysh tribe, as well as Abu Sufyan, who came later on. No mention about Kisra in his book, playing a major role next to those people. He don't even play a role that is as or was as major as fucking Umar. You know what I'm saying? So more that, like I say, that portion is a folktale. But what I do think is true is that he may have had some type of battle with Muhammad's forces. Probably not Muhammad himself, but his forces. Now, why do I say that? And remember, it was supposedly like 2 battles. And like I say, YouTube, I talk like I'm talking to an audience, but this is really just for documentation purposes, book reports, etc. But the reason why I think that may be probable is because in that chapter, right, remember, Muhammad had appointed Al-Aliyah Hadrami as the governor initially over Al-Bahrain. This is 529. Something happened later on to where Muhammad not necessarily changed his mind, but he basically relegated Al-Aliyah Al-Hadrami, and he made him like the head of a district within the lands of Al-Bahrain, and this district was called Qatif, Al-Qatif. And then, of course, like within this particular hadith that I read this about, they added the possibility that another guy named Ibn Sa'id may have been placed at another district called Al-Qat. But when I read about both of those towns, when I included that in my jargon, they're the same thing. They're one fucking town. They translate to different words, but it's basically one town. And I'm like, okay, well, could it have changed later on? No, it did not. Al-Qatif is the same as Al-Qat. So, again, because they said it's a possibility, but it did add that it's more than likely the case that Al-Alaya Al-Hadrami was replaced or reappointed, and I'd rather say demoted, really, because if you go from fucking having jurisdiction over an entire fucking region to just having jurisdiction over a single district within this region, Al-Qatif, you got demoted. Now, they didn't say why he did that, but that's what Muhammad chose for him, and then that's when he made the other guy, okay? Now, this is the part of the hadith that they say is more than likely the case. The other guy that I just mentioned, Ibn Sa'id, that's when Muhammad made him the vizier, as I like to call it, instead of the governor, over all the lands of Al-Bahrain, even though that didn't really last that much longer because after Muhammad died and then Abu Bakr became the caliph, you know, they say the people were suggesting that they wanted Al-Alaya Al-Hadrami to be the governor again over them, and that's when Caliph Abu Bakr made the decision to make him the governor again over that region. But again, that's later on. And the question in my mind when I read this is like, okay, why did Muhammad demote him in the first place? Now, I don't feel like this is like gaming, because think about it. Every time somebody come out with a book, anybody that had the opportunity to read a book or whatever, and you read somebody else's interpretation, you know, whether they're right or wrong, they're using their best fucking, like they processing shit as far as what makes sense to them in their mind. You know what I'm saying? Because from my point of view, you get what you get when you read about history. They're not always going to include everything. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'll give an example. And I'm just giving this example to make it more understandable before I go along. Like, for instance, in the beginning, the initial part of this book, when they talked about how Muhammad had sent the envoy to the people there, all right, in Al-Bahrain. And then these people there accepted their terms. More so Al-Mutahhir ibn Sawa. Now, when you think about it, they didn't just fucking accept the terms. A lot more had happened before that, but they don't include that. They just tell you what happened, like the main shit that happened. You got to kind of figure that shit out on your own. So that's the same thing with this example. What happened that made Muhammad demote Al-Alaya Al-Hadrami? I'm leaving room in my mind based on what I read about the Kisra legend, or the legend of Kisra, that some type of fight did ensue. Now, going back to the reference as far as the oral history from the Nigerians, when they talked about Kisra and where he lived at, they referred to it as Bimin Kisra. All right, so it's B-I-M-I-N, B-I-M-I-M, and then Kisra, K-I-S-R-A. But Bimin Kisra is not the literal name of a town. What it means is the town of Kisra, all right? But in this book, going back to this other reference, all right, in the book, The Origins of an Islamic State, Kisra supposedly lived in Al-Hassa or Al-Hajar. So in my mind, I'm going to say that is where he lived at. So Bimin Kisra is a representation of that fucking town in Eastern Arabia. That's like fucking 200 miles west of that little peninsula called Qatar, all right? 200 miles inland. Well, not completely inland because you got a little portion of the Persian Gulf, but basically from Qatar heading west, you got, it's like exactly 200 miles away from that. So that's the town that he lived at. So Bimin Kisra represents Al-Hassa. I was like, yes, I figured that part out. And that's the first thing. I'm like, more than likely, when they didn't want to pay the tax, it probably was some type of rebellion as well. People more than likely refused, at least in his circle. Because if you got like different facts, when I use the term factions, I'm using it to kind of like describe a demographic, but more so from a religious standpoint. So when I'm thinking about the town Al-Hassa, okay, you got Jews, you got polytheists, and then you got the people that convert to Islam, but you also had Magians there also. So when I say faction, I'm talking about the people that was more so within the circle of Kisra, all right? So that faction in particular probably did do a little bit more to refuse and kind of rebel. Now, when the legend of Kisra talks about how Muhammad had conflict and if battle occurred, I'm going to take a further step and say they're more so talking about the forces of Muhammad. You know, not him literally himself, but his forces. Now, if he had sent from Hadramaut, Al-Aliyah al-Hadrami there, he's the person responsible that's physically there in the fucking region. All he's doing is conveying messages. Because remember, later on when he gathered all of the diners, he took it back to Muhammad. And, you know, Muhammad gave some of those diners to his uncle Al-Abbas ibn al-Muttalib because that was like the most that he had ever got. Some people having to pay taxes because his region is so vast as far as extending from fucking south to north. All right? So Muhammad physically himself wasn't in the region. That's the man that he put in charge. So if a rebellion did occur, that means that guy was more so responsible for repelling this rebellion from Kisra. Kisra and his forces probably more than likely were successful the first time, defeated the second time. Okay? Al-Aliyah al-Hadrami got a report what's going on in the region to Muhammad. So Muhammad probably took that into account. And, you know, other shit happened as well. I'm pretty sure other things did happen because, like I say, they don't include everything. But that happening itself, as told in the legend of Kisra, and then what they provide in this book, I guarantee you a little fight did occur, all right? And they lost the first time around. Muhammad probably felt some type of way about that, wasn't completely satisfied about it. That may have added to him being demoted later on before he died. And, you know, like I say, I leave room for possibility of other things too. But I guarantee you that played a part. So that's my reason for believing that those two battles more than likely occurred. You know, when I think about the psychology of it, this is all the way in fucking Eastern Arabia. Now, when you look at the atlas and you look at Al-Hassa and then you look at Qatar, when you look at it on a piece of paper, it doesn't seem that far. But 200 miles is pretty far. It takes 12 hours to walk 40 miles. And that's only if you're not taking any breaks. If you're taking a break, it's going to be, if you take like a 5-hour break like I did, it's going to take you about like 17 hours altogether. So almost an entire day. That's only 40 miles. 200 miles, you have a small space between the peninsula of Qatar and Al-Hassa, which is at the border of Eastern Arabia. So if you're going to travel all the way across, I'm thinking about it like, okay, if you're willing to travel all the way west across Arabia, whether you're doing it vertically or diagonally, it doesn't really matter. Then you got to go into a whole nother fucking continent. Then you got to go deeper, you know, into the central portion of this continent. So basically, you're going through the Sudan all the way till you get to Nigeria, then you settle there. All right? There's some truth in that story because, like I say, people embrace it today in Nigeria. If not the whole entire population, at least those 4 to 5 places, you know what I mean, that accept the history as being true, even though you got different versions to the story itself. So if Muhammad will leave and go to Medina due to this revolution that he started, if you had other people that was leaving and going into Ethiopia because things got so bad, I'm looking at it like more than likely Kisra and his factions refused, but took like an extra step and didn't want to be under no type of subjugation whatsoever. Did not want to pay no fucking, they didn't want to convert, and they did not want to pay no fucking taxes. That's injured. All right? You're talking about a diner. That's money. That's value. So a fight probably did ensue, and then another fight ensued. After that, they had no choice but to leave. So that's why I believe more than likely those two battles had occurred. Yes, it did. So that's what I believe about this story. Let's see, what else? I think that's probably about it. Unless I'm forgetting something else, I don't think I am. As far as Kishra and the legend is concerned, and that's the relation again, going back to the book chapter, Conquest of Al-Bahrain, and I think after that, that's when they started talking about, because I kind of like made a leap forward and then a leap backwards, but it all makes sense in chronological order, because again, these are different like hadiths within this chapter. It's not all this information is not embodied in just one hadith itself. You got different hadiths that you got to take from. Sometimes they contradict themselves. You got to use your own fucking mind again, and that's what I did. So basically, after that hadith in particular, that portion of that hadith, that's when they started talking about like what happened during the caliphate of Abu Khari. The only reason why I brought that little particular portion up is because it was sort of relevant. So the rest of it is basically what happened during his caliphate, a little bit of it, and then a lot of it is what happened during the caliphate of Umar. And like I said, I'm going in chronological order, so I kind of like separated that from the equation. And then after this chapter, you know, they got another portion about Al-Yemen, so they include a little bit more hadiths about Al-Yemen itself. See what I'm saying? So that's basically it for the chapter concerning Al-Bahrain. That's the conquest of Al-Bahrain. And like I said, I'm pretty sure some fighting occurred. You know, the people just didn't acquiesce. But, you know, as far as the information that they provided, that's what I reconveyed. And then for my own analysis of it, as far as what I think is relevant, definitely, most motherfucking importantly, that guy Kishra. So tomorrow I got to go ahead and continue this, go on to the next chapter, take down the jargon, and then after that, start back copying the rest of the book. Because after Al-Yemen, you know, that's where I stopped at. So after Al-Yemen, that last final portion that I got recorded with a fucking pen, writing down every sentence and all that, that's when I got to continue on copying more and more chapters. I'm kind of surprised that I kind of got through all that shit. You know, I'm thinking I probably had like 6 more chapters before I got to start rewriting and then going further with it. But, you know, I got to give myself the kudos for that. But that's what I'm thinking. I think all my shit is solid, and I can defend it. So it's July 31st, 10:25 p.m. JL.